Structuring your talk, organization and meta-discourse in the expertise talk. This video will help you develop your TED-style talk further using basic principles of rhetoric and meta-discourse. Meta-discourse is the overt language that refers to the talk itself rather than to the subject matter. Together, these basic elements can help you keep your listeners engaged and make your points clear. Begin by getting organized. Getting organized means having something to organize. So gather these three types of materials to work with. First, I recommend that you begin by building trust and empathy with your listeners through a story about your own experience. Tell them about yourself in a way that shows them why you care about the subject and the nature of your involvement with it. Even if your expertise comes strictly from reading about something, and that's rarely the case, at least you can talk about how the subject aroused your curiosity. Professional researchers, many of whom have given TED Talks, often begin with a story about a moment of insight that they experienced personally. For instance, David Reisel, a neuroscientist who studies the relationship between brain function and criminality, begins his complex TED Talk with a story about meeting a murderer named Joe. Even Alan Savory's talk on desertification and climate change, a topic that literally encompasses the entire world, contains this sentence about 3 paragraphs in. I took this picture in the Tihama Desert while 25 millimeters, that's an inch of rain, was falling. He took the picture, he felt the rain, he was there. And when we hear him tell the story in such clear, concrete, and personal terms, a broad topic becomes far easier to understand. Telling us about his experience so directly invites us to come along with him. But what you experience isn't necessarily the rule, so tell stories about other people too. Show that what you've seen isn't just your experience alone. By doing this, you'll expand the circle of empathy and experience. Your audience will find themselves understanding how others have experienced what you have. The most powerful element of all of this is narrative, storytelling. Just remember to be efficient and on point. Don't lose track of what each story should illustrate. Also, once you've established that you, then others, have seen, experienced, or noticed something, it's time to prove a larger point about it by grounding it in research. How many people does this issue affect? Where are these things you're talking about? What do experts think of it? Bring in your research and show that you have a rock-solid basis for what you're claiming that your experience taught you. Once you're done showing your evidence, come back to your general idea again, and your listeners will get it. Adding just the right amount of meta-discourse can do a great deal for your listeners. Here are a few techniques for using it to make things clearer and more persuasive. First, try to take your listeners along on your journey. Let me show you a famous instance of persuasive speech using personal experience and narrative. The ancient Greek philosopher Socrates, who repeatedly told his listeners that he didn't know anything, began his speech about love in the dialogue named Symposium in exactly this way. Instead of telling his friends what he learned about love immediately, he began instead by telling the story of how he learned about it from Diotima, a wise woman from Mantinea. Now, we have no idea whether she was real, or whether this story was completely made up. But what this story does is allow Socrates to reverse his role as the wise person teaching the foolish, and blunder along himself, answering Diotima's questions and discovering that he had been completely wrong and changing his mind. Now, I'm not suggesting that you make things up. We'll leave that to Socrates. But the trick is to admit having been ignorant at one time and tell the story about finding out the truth. This technique gives your audience a chance to come along with you on the journey toward knowledge without feeling humiliated for not having known all along. Now, that's also why you should anticipate and acknowledge the emotional landscape. See, that's because feelings count. If you can add a phrase or two here and there that shows that you know what your listeners might be thinking and feeling, they'll believe you that much more. Something like, I know what you must feel right now, or you must be surprised. Anything like that will give you a chance to slow down and let people think about what you've said and confirm that they're feeling the right way about it. You can also give us a sign. When the intellectual challenge of your talk gets tougher, throw up some signposts, also known as structural metadiscourse, or talk about the talk. Whenever you hear anyone say, "First, I'll tell you," or "As I said before," or "Here are 3 things," anything else where you hear the speaker say something that isn't adding new content, but is instead talking about the structure of the talk, that's structural metadiscourse. Used sparingly and wisely, this can give your listeners the signposts they need to make sense out of your talk. But be careful. They're a little like water and soup. A little bit to make things flow is wonderful. Too much makes things very bland and dull. In addition, you might try shout-outs and callbacks. These are subtle methods to give your listeners signals about how to take the proper attitude toward the talk. The shout-out is when you thank somebody. In your talk, you can call attention to the ways that you appreciate and respect others who have accomplished things in your field. Academics do this all the time, with footnotes and reviews of the research, and it's a good habit to develop in everything. Give respect and you'll receive it in return. The callback is something else. It's a reference to something earlier in your talk that helps bring it together. Comedians use this trick all the time near the end of a set by slipping in a reminder of a joke they told much earlier. Your objective isn't to get a laugh, but to give your listeners a sense of coherence and reward them for remembering. Finally, think about the consequences. Reward your audience for listening to you by telling them why it matters to them right now. The TED Talks contain many of these moments. Andrew Solomon tells us how understanding people vastly different from ourselves can transform the world into a better place. David Reisel gives us hope for changing the worst criminals into better people. You might not have something quite so important to say, but there are consequences to everything. Think about it, and good luck with your talk.